I just killed someone and I need to go back to jail. Come on. I just killed a woman and I'm going back to jail. Everything's cool. Recorded in the van, sir. Keep me in it. Keep me. She stumbles into the street wearing only a night dress and dressing gown, clutching her side as blood seeps through the fabric. Her voice cuts through the early morning darkness of a quiet London street. Shaine stabbed me. He stabbed me. Help. Help. Neighbors rushed to her aid. Phones already dialing 999. But even as they tried to comfort her, even as they pressed their hands against her wounds, they can see the life draining from her eyes. She's been stabbed not once, not twice, but 19 times. Some reports say 23. And she's 8 weeks pregnant. The man she's pointing at, the man who stands nearby watching her die, simply walks away into the shadows. And this is the story of Alana Odysseos, a young mother who thought she'd found love, but instead found something far darker. Shaine March was born on 9th of February, the year 1978, in London. To understand the man who would become a double murderer, we have to go back to his early years, to the streets of South London where he grew up. Not much is publicly known about his childhood, but what we do know paints a picture of someone who learned violence early. By the year 1995, when he was just 17 years old, March already had convictions for assault and criminal damage. These weren't youthful pranks or minor scuffles. They were early warning signs of a young man who struggled to control his anger, who saw violence as a solution rather than a problem. But it was 5 years later, in January the year 2000, that Shaine March would cross a line from which there could be no return. He was 21 years old when he walked into a McDonald's restaurant in Denmark Hill, South London. What happened next would change multiple lives forever. During an altercation inside the restaurant, March pulled out a knife and stabbed 17-year-old Andre Drummond directly in the neck. The wound was catastrophic. Andre died from his injuries. March was arrested, tried, and in July the year 2000 convicted of murder. The judge sentenced him to life imprisonment, as is mandatory for murder convictions in the UK. Life imprisonment in the UK doesn't always mean spending your entire life behind bars. It means you're given a minimum term, a tariff that you must serve before you can even be considered for parole. After that minimum term, you remain on what's called a life license for the rest of your life, meaning you can be recalled to prison at any time if you breach conditions or pose a risk. March served his minimum term and was released on life license in early year 2013 after spending roughly 13 years in prison. He was 35 years old, stepping back into a world that had moved on without him. Freedom, however, didn't last long. Just months after his release, in July the year 2013, March was recalled to prison. The reason? He had assaulted another partner, and this partner was pregnant. According to court documents and media reports, March had stamped on her stomach. Think about that for a moment. A man convicted of murder, released on the promise that he'd reformed, chose to attack a vulnerable pregnant woman in one of the most vicious ways imaginable. It was a clear signal that whatever rehabilitation had supposedly occurred behind bars hadn't worked. The violence was still there, simmering just beneath the surface, waiting for the right trigger. March remained in custody until February the year 2018 when he was released once again. By this point, he was 40 years old. He'd spent a significant portion of his adult life in prison. Yet the system deemed him safe enough to walk among the public. He settled in Surrey Quays, southeast London, and tried to rebuild some semblance of a normal life. But for men like Shaine March, normal is a fragile concept. The patterns of control, anger, and violence don't simply disappear because a sentence has been served. Those who knew March during this period described him as someone who could be charming when he wanted to be, someone who knew how to present a certain image to the world. But behind closed doors, away from the eyes of probation officers and social workers, a different man emerged. He was controlling, possessive, quick to anger. He demanded absolute loyalty and obedience from his partners, and when he didn't get it, the consequences could be terrifying. This is a common pattern among domestic abusers. The public face is often very different from the private reality. Friends and family of victims frequently say they had no idea what was happening because the abuser was so skilled at maintaining appearances. March's behavior towards Alana Odysseos, as we'll explore later, ticked every box on the coercive control checklist. Alana Odysseos was 32 years old when her life was brutally cut short. She grew up in Suffolk in the gentle countryside of eastern England, far from the urban intensity of London where she would eventually settle. Those who knew her in her younger years remember a girl who was full of life, someone who lit up a room when she walked in. She was kind, considerate, the sort of person who would go out of her way to help a friend in need. Her father, Alan Yates, would later describe her as happy-go-lucky, someone who believed in standing up for what was right, who had a strong moral compass and wasn't afraid to use it. Alana was a mother to 2 children, and by all accounts, motherhood was something she embraced wholeheartedly. Her children were her world. She was the kind of mom who made sure homework was done, who packed lunches with little notes inside, who showed up to school events no matter how busy life got. Her family describes her as loving, devoted, someone who would sacrifice anything for her kids' happiness and well-being. In a world that can often feel cold and disconnected, Alana was a source of warmth and stability for those around her. But life hadn't always been easy for Alana. Like many single mothers in the UK, she faced financial pressures, the challenge of balancing work and childcare, the exhaustion that comes from trying to be everything to everyone. She lived in Walthamstow, East London, an area that's seen significant gentrification in recent years, but still retains pockets of deprivation and social challenge. Walthamstow is a diverse, vibrant community. But it's also a place where resources are stretched thin, where support services are often overwhelmed, where people can slip through the cracks. It was in this context that Alana met Shaine March sometime in early year 2024. We don't know exactly how they met, whether it was through mutual friends, online, or by chance. But what we do know is that the relationship moved quickly. Within weeks, March had become a significant presence in Alana's life. At first, as is so often the case with abusive relationships, things seemed good. March could be charming, attentive, generous with his time and affection. He told Alana what she wanted to hear, made her feel special, made her feel seen. For a woman juggling the demands of single motherhood, the attention must have felt like a lifeline. But slowly, subtly, things began to change. Alana's sister, Jasmine Yates, noticed at first. Alana, who had always been so open and communicative, started to become withdrawn. She seemed anxious, on edge, as though she was constantly walking on eggshells. Jasmine tried to talk to her about it, tried to understand what was happening, but Alana was evasive. She made excuses, downplayed concerns, insisted everything was fine. This is textbook behavior for someone experiencing domestic abuse. The shame, the fear, the misplaced loyalty to the abuser, all combined to keep victims silent. As the months went on, the warning signs became harder to ignore. Friends and family noticed bruises, heard about arguments, saw how March controlled Alana's movements and communications. He made her delete all the male contacts from her phone. Friends, colleagues, even family members. He demanded that she video call him regularly to prove she was alone, to prove she wasn't doing anything he disapproved of. He would turn up unannounced, checking on her, making sure she was where she said she'd be. This kind of surveillance is a hallmark of coercive control, a way of stripping away a person's autonomy and independence until they feel they can't function without the abuser's permission. There were moments of violence, too. On at least one occasion, March smashed a glass in Alana's face. Imagine the terror of that moment. The sudden explosion of anger, the sharp pain, the blood, the realization that the person who claims to love you is capable of hurting you in such a deliberate, vicious way. Alana confided in a friend afterwards, admitting she was frightened. Her sister Jasmine told her something that would later haunt the family. "If he can glass you, he can kill you." Those words spoken in desperation and fear would prove tragically prophetic. But despite the fear, despite the violence, Alana stayed. Why? It's a question people always ask when they hear about domestic abuse. And it's a question that reveals a fundamental misunderstanding of how these relationships work. In the spring of the year 2024, Alana discovered she was pregnant. It was her third child. And despite everything happening in her relationship with March, she was excited. She wanted this baby. She saw it as a new beginning, a source of joy and hope. But March's reaction was very different. He didn't want the child. He pressured Alana to have an abortion. Sent her voice notes telling her to get rid of it. Made it clear that this pregnancy was an inconvenience he wasn't willing to tolerate. For Alana, this must have been heartbreaking. The man she'd hoped would be a partner, a co-parent, was instead demanding she terminate a pregnancy she desperately wanted to continue. By July the year 2024, Alana was about 8 weeks pregnant. She was still living in her Walthamstow flat, still in a relationship with March, still hoping against hope that things would get better. Her children were with her, her family was worried sick, and the man who would kill her was growing more volatile by the day. The stage was set for a tragedy that could have been prevented if only anyone had been able to break through the cycle of violence and control that had taken over Alana's life. The night of 21st of July, the year 2024, started like so many others in Alana Odysseos' flat in Walthamstow. Shaine March was there and the tension between them was palpable. They'd been arguing on and off for days about the pregnancy, about Alana's refusal to have an abortion, about March's increasing anger and frustration. Neighbors would later tell police they'd heard raised voices throughout the evening. The kind of argument that ebbs and flows, quieting down for a while before flaring up again. But this time, something was different. This time, the argument wouldn't just fade away. As the night wore on, and the early hours of 22nd of July approached, the argument intensified. March was furious that Alana wouldn't comply with his demands. In his mind, she was defying him, challenging his authority, refusing to do what he wanted. For a man who'd spent years exerting control over his partners, this was intolerable. Witnesses would later recount hearing Alana's voice, desperate and pleading. "I don't want to kill my baby." Those words capture everything about this tragedy. A mother trying to protect her unborn child. A woman asserting her right to make her own choices and a man who couldn't accept that he didn't have absolute power over her. What happened next unfolded with horrifying speed. At some point in the early hours of the morning, March went to the kitchen. He picked up a knife, a long kitchen knife, the kind you'd use for preparing meals, for cutting vegetables, for ordinary domestic tasks. But in his hands it became a weapon. He returned to where Alana was and without warning, without giving her a chance to defend herself or escape, he began to stab her. The attack was frenzied and brutal. Forensic pathologist Dr. Matsika, who conducted the post-mortem examination, would later testify that Alana suffered between 19 and 23 stab wounds. Reports vary slightly, but the exact number almost doesn't matter when you're talking about that level of violence. This wasn't a crime of passion in the sense of a momentary loss of control. This was sustained deliberate violence. March had time to think. Time to stop. Time to realize what he was doing. But he didn't stop. He kept going until Alana had no chance of survival somehow. Despite her catastrophic injuries, Alana managed to get out of the flat. Perhaps she was trying to escape, trying to get help, trying to put distance between herself and her attacker. She stumbled out into Lynmouth Road, wearing only her night dress and dressing gown, clutching her side where blood was pouring from multiple wounds. It was the early hours of the morning, still dark, the street quiet, except for the sound of her desperate cries. Members of the public were the first to find her. Imagine being woken by screams, looking out your window, and seeing a woman collapsed on the pavement, bleeding, dying. Several neighbors rushed out to help. Phones already dialing 999, trying to comfort her, trying to stem the bleeding with whatever they had to hand. Alana, even in her final moments, had the presence of mind to tell them what had happened. She pointed at March, who was standing nearby, and shouted, "Shaine stabbed me. He stabbed me. Help! Help!" March didn't run. He didn't try to help. He didn't show any sign of remorse or panic. He simply stood there watching and then calmly walked away. Think about that for a moment. The woman he'd claimed to love, the mother of his unborn child, was dying on the street, and he just walked away. Witnesses described his demeanor as eerily calm, almost detached, as though he was observing something that had nothing to do with him. Police and paramedics arrived within minutes, but it was already too late. Alana Odysseos died there on the pavement outside her home, surrounded by strangers who tried desperately to save her. She was 32 years old. Her unborn, about 8 weeks into development, died with her. 2 lives extinguished in a matter of minutes because one man couldn't accept that he didn't own another human being. But the story doesn't end there. As March walked away from the scene, he was already taking steps to cover his tracks. He disposed of evidence as he went: his mobile phone, Alana's mobile phone, items of clothing stained with blood. He threw his phone into a drain, but not before recording a voice note. In it, he said, "Mom, I just killed a woman and I'm going back to jail. I just killed someone and I need to go back to jail. Mom, I just killed a woman and I'm going back to jail. There's something deeply disturbing about that message. It's not an expression of remorse or horror at what he's done. It's matter of fact, almost resigned, as though he's reporting on something mundane. He knew exactly what he'd done, and he knew exactly what the consequences would be." March made his way to Cream's Cafe in Walthamstow. Arriving around 4:41 a.m., staff there were understandably alarmed. When they saw him, he was covered in blood, disheveled, clearly in some kind of distress. He told them he'd killed his wife and child. The staff immediately called 999 and police arrived shortly after to arrest him. Even in custody, March's behavior was chilling. When officers told him he was being arrested on suspicion of murder, he responded, "I did it. I killed her. Alana Odysseos. I killed her." Ha ha. That laugh, that cruel mocking laugh tells you everything you need to know about his state of mind. Everything's cool. Recorded in the van, "Sir. I don't ever want to come up. Keep me in it. Keep me in. I want my grave in a yeah. Me. You see my face?" He wasn't sorry. He wasn't in shock. He was in some twisted way satisfied. At Barking Police Station, March continued to boast about what he'd done. He told officers, "I stabbed her multiple times with a long kitchen knife. I think the last stabbing was by the back of her shoulder blade, probably puncturing her heart." He described the attack in detail, almost as though he was proud of it. He referred to himself as scum who deserved to be in jail, but there was no genuine remorse in his words, just a kind of performative self-awareness that rang hollow. The investigation that followed was thorough and painstaking. Detectives from the Metropolitan Police's Specialist Crime Command took charge, working to piece together exactly what had happened. They recovered CCTV footage from the area showing March's movements before and after the attack. They retrieved his phone from the drain and extracted the voice note he'd recorded. They interviewed witnesses, collected forensic evidence, and built a case that left no room for doubt about what had occurred. Would you have trusted your instincts if you'd heard those arguments through the walls? Would you have called the police even if you weren't sure what was happening? It's a question worth thinking about, because the answer could save a life. After his arrest in the early hours of 22nd of July, the year 2024, Shaine March was taken into custody and charged with the murder of Alana Odysseos. He was remanded to HMP Belmarsh, one of the UK's highest security prisons located in southeast London. Belmarsh is where some of the country's most dangerous criminals are held, and it's where March would remain throughout his trial and beyond. Initially, March's legal team entered a plea of not guilty to murder. Instead, they admitted to manslaughter on the grounds of diminished responsibility. This is a partial defense in English law set out in the Homicide Act 1957 and amended by the Coroners and Justice Act 2009. To successfully argue diminished responsibility, the defense must prove that at the time of the killing, the defendant was suffering from an abnormality of mental functioning that substantially impaired their ability to understand their conduct, form rational judgments, or exercise self-control. If successful, this defense reduces a murder conviction to manslaughter, which carries a lesser sentence. The trial began at the Old Bailey, London's Central Criminal Court, in October the year 2025. The prosecution, led by the Crown Prosecution Service's Specialist Homicide Unit, presented a compelling case. They showed CCTV footage of March's movements, played the voice note he'd recorded, presented forensic evidence linking him to the crime scene, and called witnesses who testified to the violence and control he'd exerted over Alana. They also revealed March's previous convictions, including his year 2000 murder of Andre Drummond and his year 2013 assault on another pregnant partner. This history painted a picture of a man with a clear pattern of violence, particularly towards vulnerable women. On the seventh day of the trial, 17th of October, the year 2025, something significant happened. March changed his plea. He admitted to murder. This wasn't a sudden attack of conscience or a moment of genuine remorse. It was a recognition that the evidence against him was overwhelming and that continuing to fight the charge was pointless. By pleading guilty, March avoided the need for a full trial, sparing Alana's family the ordeal of hearing every detail of her final moments in open court. But it also meant he couldn't escape the consequences of what he'd done. Following March's guilty plea, Mr. Justice Murray discharged the jury and lifted reporting restrictions. That this heartbreaking story pulls back the curtain on hidden dangers lurking in everyday lives, teaching us that true